How do you turn the most successful jetliner in aviation history into a death trap? The answer lies in a boardroom decision made under pressure, where Boeing executives faced their worst nightmare. Airbus was eating their lunch. The A320neo was stealing customers left and right, and Boeing had two choices: spend a decade and $20 billion building a brand new aircraft, or take a shortcut that would ultimately cost them everything. This is the inside story of how corporate pressure, engineering compromises, and a ticking clock created the Boeing 737 MAX, an aircraft so flawed that it would ground an entire fleet, destroy Boeing's reputation, and raise questions that the aviation industry is still trying to answer today. The story of the Boeing 737 MAX is a brutal, high-stakes drama. It is a story of ambition, engineering compromise, and profound tragedy. The narrative starts not in the factory, but in the fiercely competitive sky of 2010. Boeing's great rival, Airbus, made a power move. They unveiled the A320neo, a re-engined version of their workhorse jet, promising 15% better fuel efficiency. Airlines went crazy for it. This was an existential threat to Boeing's dominance in the narrow-body market, a sector where the company traditionally reigned supreme. Boeing felt the pressure immediately. They controlled the sky with the venerable 737, an aircraft family that had flown since 1967. The 737 was the most successful jetliner in history. But the 737's design was old. It was a low-slung machine, inherently close to the ground. The new generation of engines like the CFM LEAP 1B needed for that promised efficiency were huge. They had a fan diameter of 69.4 inches, significantly larger than the previous generation. The company faced a choice: design an all-new jet from scratch, a process that would take a decade and cost $10 to $12 billion, or quickly re-engine the 737 to fight back. Designing a new plane, known internally as the Yellowstone Project, was the purist's choice. It was the correct engineering path, but the clock was ticking and the money was calling. The turning point was delivered by a customer ultimatum. American Airlines, a loyal Boeing customer for decades, announced an order for 460 narrow-body jets, including 130 Airbus A320neos in 2011. This was a betrayal, a shockwave through the company's Seattle headquarters, which had by then relocated to Chicago. American Airlines essentially gave Boeing a deadline: develop a competing jet now or lose the war. The decision was made. The MAX would be an adaptation, not a clean-sheet design. Cost and speed won the day, driven by an executive culture that prized shareholder returns over the traditional engineering-first ethos. The estimated cost for this hurried re-engine effort was kept relatively low, projected to be around $2 to $4 billion, a fraction of the price of a new aircraft. The timeline was aggressive, a disciplined 6-year schedule. Southwest Airlines, the original launch customer for the 737, was signed up as the launch customer for the MAX, an order critical to morale and market perception. The engineers were forced to work within the constraints of the classic 737 frame. The massive new LEAP engines were simply too large to fit naturally under the 737's wing without the engine's casing or nacelle, scraping the tarmac during takeoff and landing. The solution was a critical engineering compromise. The engines had to be mounted higher and slightly further forward on the wing, actually extending the nacelles ahead of the wing's leading edge. This solved the ground clearance problem, but it unleashed an aerodynamic monster. The repositioned engines subtly but critically altered the jet's flight dynamics. At high angles of attack, which occur during slow flight or steep turns, the sheer size and forward placement of the engine nacelles began to generate their own parasitic lift. This lift caused the aircraft's nose to pitch up uncontrollably, creating an undesirable tendency to stall in certain low-speed, high-G maneuvers. This violated the fundamental certification requirements that demanded a predictable, steady increase in stick force as the stall approached, giving the pilot clear warning and time to react. The flight control system was then tasked with fixing the physical problem created by the engine repositioning. Boeing desperately wanted to maintain the 737's commonality. This was the golden ticket for airlines. Pilots could transition from the older 737 NG model to the new MAX with a simple, inexpensive 2-hour course on an iPad and a brief familiarization flight, rather than costly, mandatory full-motion simulator time. This saved airlines millions of dollars per fleet and made the MAX far more competitive against the Airbus A320neo. This low-cost pilot training was non-negotiable for key customers like Southwest. The solution was a hidden software patch, the Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS. MCAS was an automation system buried deep within the flight control computer. Its job was to automatically push the aircraft's nose down by moving the horizontal stabilizer, the small wing on the tail, if the system believed the angle of attack was too high. It was intended to run in the background, making the MAX handle just like the older 737s to satisfy the commonality requirement. It was originally designed to operate only in narrow, extreme aerodynamic corners of the flight envelope, totally transparent to the crew. The fatal design flaw was a combination of lack of redundancy and extreme power. MCAS was allowed to take its critical angle data from only one of the aircraft's two angle of attack sensors on the nose. This single point of failure was an inexcusable oversight. If that single sensor failed, or was damaged by a bird or ground crew, or provided erroneous data, as happened in both crashes, the system would receive a false positive reading. It would believe the jet was stalling when it was flying perfectly normally. Furthermore, the original MCAS software was programmed to repeatedly run, commanding up to 2.5 degrees of nose-down trim for up to 9.26 seconds, pausing for only 5 seconds, and then running again, continually driving the nose toward the ground. The system also had full authority, meaning its inputs were powerful and difficult for the pilot to counteract using only the control column. The pilots were not told about this system. Boeing intentionally chose not to document MCAS in the pilots' operating manuals or include it in their training. This secrecy was maintained to justify the low-cost pilot transition, a point of sale for the aircraft. A critical warning light, the AOA disagree alert, which would have flagged the problem by showing the two sensors were providing wildly different readings, was sold as an optional, extra-cost feature to airlines. Most airlines, including the ones involved in the subsequent crashes, did not pay for it. The result was a ticking time bomb, a powerful, hidden, automated system with a single point of failure and no clear cockpit warning. The 737 MAX was certified by the Federal Aviation Administration in March 2017. This certification itself became a major controversy. The FAA had delegated much of the review process to Boeing itself under a program called Organization Designation Authorization. This effectively allowed Boeing employees to act as FAA representatives. This system, designed for speed and efficiency, created a profound conflict of interest. Boeing engineers concealed the true extent of MCAS's power and dependency on a single sensor from the safety regulators. The plane was a commercial sensation. Boeing had already secured nearly 5,000 orders for the MAX family, representing a massive backlog valued at over $600 billion. The first commercial flight was flown by Malindo Air in May 2017. Production ramped up aggressively at the Renton, Washington facility, aiming for 57 planes per month by 2019. The company's focus was relentless: rate, rate, rate. The crisis began in a matter of minutes. It was October 29, 2018. Lion Air Flight 610, a 737 MAX 8, took off from Jakarta, Indonesia. Just 13 minutes later, the plane plunged into the Java Sea. All 189 people on board perished. Lion Air was a budget carrier, and initial media coverage pointed toward pilot performance and maintenance issues, common problems in the region. But the preliminary findings revealed something far more disturbing. The black box, specifically the flight data recorder, showed the pilots struggled for control against an automated system that repeatedly pushed the nose down 26 times. An angle of attack sensor had failed and fed bad data to MCAS, triggering its activation. The pilots, unaware of MCAS, were in a desperate physical struggle they could not win. They were attempting to follow a long-standing runaway stabilizer checklist to cut off power to the trim system, but they were distracted by conflicting warnings, the control column vibrating violently due to a false stick shaker stall warning, and by the immense physical forces required to pull the nose back up. Boeing and the FAA initially insisted the plane was safe. They issued airworthiness directives and bulletins reminding pilots of the runaway stabilizer checklist. However, they still did not fully disclose the existence or the true power of MCAS to the general pilot community. This was a critical misjudgment. a fateful delay rooted in denial and the desire to protect the MAX's certification and sales advantage. Boeing CEO Dennis Muilenburg publicly maintained that the aircraft was safe and that the pilots simply needed to follow existing procedures. Then, the inconceivable happened again. Just 4 months and 10 days later, on March 10, 2019, Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302, also a 737 MAX 8, took off from Addis Ababa with its brand-new jet. Within 6 minutes, it crashed into a field at a speed of nearly 700 miles per hour, killing all 157 passengers and crew. The data recovered from the wreckage was unmistakable. The crashes, separated by an ocean, were terrifyingly similar, a grotesque mechanical déjà vu. Global regulators acted first, showcasing a profound loss of faith in U.S. oversight. China, a key market for Boeing, was the first major country to ground the entire 737 MAX fleet. Other nations followed in rapid succession. The European Union Aviation Safety Agency grounded the jet. The final, crushing blow came on March 13, 2019, when the U.S. FAA, after intense political pressure and the undeniable realization of the chilling similarities, finally grounded the 737 MAX in U.S. airspace. 387 aircraft were immediately idled across the globe. The financial fallout was staggering, a corporate disaster of historic proportions. The worldwide grounding lasted 619 days in the United States, stretching deep into 2020. Boeing had to pause production for months, a decision that hammered its supply chain, particularly Spirit Aerosystems, which makes the 737's fuselage. The company reported a massive quarterly loss of $2.9 billion in Q2 2019, the largest in its history at the time. This included a $4.9 billion charge provisioned for airline compensation alone. The total estimated direct costs of the grounding, fines, customer compensation, training mandates, and production write-offs quickly swelled past $20 billion. Analysts estimated that the grounding cost the company over $4 billion per quarter. Its stock market value dropped by over $62 billion between March and August 2019, and the share price lost 25%. Indirect costs, from lost orders and irreparable reputation damage, were valued by banks to be over $60 billion in total. Orders plummeted, with over 1,000 net orders canceled or removed from the backlog by the time of recertification. The subsequent investigations, including those by the U.S. Congress, revealed the rot in Boeing's corporate culture. The 1997 merger with McDonnell Douglas was cited as the inflection point, a moment when the financial and business school mindset, championed by executives like CEO Harry Stonecipher, overtook the engineering-first DNA that had built the 747 and 777. Stonecipher infamously stated, "When people say I changed the culture of Boeing, that was the intent, so that it is run like a business rather than a great engineering firm." The MAX was the inevitable outcome of this cultural drift. Internal emails, later released, showed engineers and test pilots raising red flags about the system's reliance on a single sensor and the resulting potential for disaster. These warnings were downplayed or ignored by management, obsessed with the development timeline and the lucrative no-simulator training promise. The company's own internal analysis showed that if pilots took more than 10 seconds to recognize and respond to the runaway stabilizer condition caused by an uncommanded MCAS activation, the result could be catastrophic. The fixes were agonizingly slow and meticulous, requiring a fundamental re-engineering of the automation. MCAS was entirely rewritten, a process overseen directly by the FAA. The revised system was finally programmed to rely on both angle of attack sensors. If the sensors disagreed by more than 5.5 degrees, MCAS would be deactivated, and the pilots would be alerted by a standard, non-optional warning light. Crucially, MCAS was limited to a single activation per high AOA event, and could never command more nose-down input than the pilot could counteract with the control column. Its authority was drastically reduced. Pilot training was fundamentally changed. The long-standing promise was broken. Pilots transitioning to the MAX now required mandatory full-motion simulator training, a requirement Boeing had fought bitterly to avoid, but one deemed absolutely essential by international regulators. This shift was a painful public admission of the original design and training failures. The manuals were completely revised, clearly describing the existence and function of the revised MCAS. The process of recertification was a global, multi-year ordeal. The FAA performed hundreds of hours of test flights and simulator checks. EASA, along with Canadian and Brazilian regulators, conducted their own parallel independent reviews, refusing to simply rubber-stamp the FAA's findings. This loss of international trust in the FAA's oversight was perhaps the most damaging systemic consequence of the crisis. Finally, in November 2020, the FAA signed the order officially ungrounding the 737 MAX in the United States. The long road to redemption began. The first U.S. commercial flight of the recertified MAX occurred in December 2020. Orders slowly started returning, driven by the jet's superior fuel economics, the very factor that led to its creation. The 14% efficiency gain over the old NG model was simply too large for airlines to ignore in a post-pandemic, cost-sensitive environment. Major orders from Ryanair, United Airlines, and Southwest demonstrated a renewed institutional, if not emotional, trust. Boeing, meanwhile, agreed to a settlement with the Department of Justice, paying over $2.5 billion, which included a criminal monetary penalty of $243.6 million, $1.77 billion of damages to airline customers, and a $500 million fund for crash victim beneficiaries. The 737 MAX was back in the air, flying hundreds of thousands of safe flights. The aircraft was, technically, safer than before the crashes due to the intense scrutiny and redundant systems. The jet seemed to have navigated its darkest hour. But the story of compromise and culture had another chapter waiting, proving that systemic issues are not fixed with a single software patch. On January 5, 2024, Alaska Airlines Flight 1282, a relatively new 737 MAX 9, suffered a terrifying mid-flight failure. The aircraft, with only 159 flights since delivery, lost a door plug, a panel filling an unused emergency exit, shortly after takeoff from Portland, Oregon. The panel violently blew out of the fuselage at 16,000 feet, causing a rapid explosive decompression. The investigation into the terrifying near disaster found a stunning lapse in basic manufacturing quality control. 4 critical bolts designed to hold the door plug in place were missing. Attention shifted definitively from flawed software design to profound quality failures on the production line. The FAA immediately grounded 171 of the MAX 9 aircraft for urgent inspections. The ensuing audit of Boeing and its supplier, Spirit AeroSystems, revealed numerous instances of non-compliance and poor tool control. The culture of cutting corners, rushing production, and valuing speed over quality, the very culture that had given rise to the original MCAS flaw, was found to be alive and well on the factory floor. The FAA took the unprecedented step of capping Boeing's 737 MAX production rate at 38 jets per month, refusing to allow an increase until the company could prove sustainable quality improvements. The damage to Boeing's reputation was catastrophic. CEO David Calhoun, brought in to clean up the mess, announced his planned departure in late 2024. The company was forced to once again stop the relentless pursuit of rate for the sake of survival. The total financial drag from the MAX saga, across both the grounding and the subsequent manufacturing crisis, now stands at well over $30 billion in direct costs and compensation, not counting the long-term cost to the brand. The 737 MAX is a tortured success story, a phoenix forced to rise from the ashes of its own corporate culture. It continues to fly, a testament to its efficiency and the critical need for narrow-body jets worldwide. The aircraft itself, with its re-engineered MCAS and updated training, is technically the safest 737 ever built. But its redemption is tied not just to the technical fixes, but to the long, arduous process of rebuilding a culture where engineering excellence and safety are genuinely prioritized over short-term financial demands. The controversy remains, a scar on the sky, a perpetual reminder of the human cost of corporate compromise and the deadly consequences of prioritizing speed over safety.